Welcome to KS, to the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities, and welcome to the seminar, Internally Displaced People in Ukraine, Victims or Agents of Change. And this seminar is organized by Ukraina.net and by the Norwegian Institute of Urban and Regional Research. And I would like to say welcome to all participants here in the meeting room in KS. We are not very many. And especially welcome to all those who are watching us online. And you are quite many. So this makes us very happy as the organizers. And those who participate online, I hope that you can hear us well and you can see us well. And please remember that you can use chat and write your comments and questions in chat. Our colleagues from KS and Neighbor are following the chat, and they will also put your questions and comments for the audience and for our speakers. We are very glad to welcome Oksana Mikheeva and Alexander Tretyak, both coming from Ukraine, directly or indirectly. And I think that we are very glad that we are together here with Neighbor and KS, as we have been working in Ukraine for many years, since 2008, working with decentralization issues, also the issues on local democracy and development of municipal services. And of course, since last year, February, you have been in our hearts and our minds, people in Ukraine. We have been following our colleagues and also many Ukrainian refugees coming to different countries close to the border to Ukraine and also to Norway. And all these events, they have also engaged Norwegian municipalities that are now working with establishing contacts between themselves and their colleagues in Ukraine. And we in KS support this process, and we really hope that there will be many connections between municipalities in Norway and Ukraine. And when we are working with municipalities in Ukraine, we know that municipalities are very different. Topics and issues are very different to address. And one of them is internally displaced people and the role of local governments dealing with this issue and also providing services to people in Ukraine.
Dear colleagues, it's also a very great pleasure for me to welcome you to this seminar. I represent Neighbor and Ukraina.net. We have been working since 2008 together on local government, decentralization reform, local service delivery. And it's quite sad that this topic of internally displaced has been overlooked partly in Norwegian media. So we think that it's important that this issue is highlighted, because we have quite a few projects on refugees coming to Norway and other European countries, which is very important. But we should not forget that there are very many internally displaced also in Ukraine that we will hear about more today. We are Ukraina.net, so many of you will not know who we are, so I will just briefly introduce what Ukraina.net is. Right after the invasion or the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, researchers at Oslo Met, together with other researchers, thought that we need a network for Ukraine research in Norway, because we found that much of the research that has been done in Norway and other European countries has been very Russia-focused, and people have been studying Russia studies and seen Ukraine as sort of a side country to study. But we thought that Ukraine should be studied in its own right, a country with a long history, its own language, its own identity, and this should be also highlighted. So we expected there to be some 20 researchers who would join this network, but now by this time we are already more than 60 And some of them are also refugees coming from Ukraine who can take part in the Norwegian research community and bring their competence and insights into a very fruitful collaboration. So some of them are also present in the audience here today. We were approached by scholars in Sweden, and they had created a similar network there. Together, we went to Nordforsk and the Nordic Council of Ministers, and we have just got funding for a 2-3 year network of, among Nordic and Baltic scholars to help to contribute research competence in the rebuilding of Ukraine, both during the war and after the war, and hopefully victory soon. Now I will introduce today's main speakers. I will start with Oksana Mikheeva. Elita will later introduce the other speaker, but Oksana is a professor of the sociology department at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. Currently, she is a visiting scholar at the Viadrina Institute for European Studies in Germany. And Oksana has herself been forcibly displaced in 2014 by the war in eastern Ukraine from her native city of Donetsk. She has worked extensively on social and integration and adaptation of internally displaced people from war-torn regions in Ukraine. And her presentation is called Internally Displaced Persons, IDPs in Ukraine, Victims or Agents of Change. So Oksana, please, the floor is yours.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a very big pleasure for me to be here and talk about Ukrainian situation, previous and current situation. And thank you very much for your time and for your support. It's very important for Ukraine. And my presentation, I want to start with several statements which are very important for understanding the whole logic of my presentation and the whole logic of the situation about which we will talk today, maybe during our discussion. First of all, forced migrants do not cross state border and remain citizens of their state. This affects the perception that internal forced migration is less problematic and thus does not merit as much attention as refugeeism and makes IDP to a certain extent invisible. We're faced with the problem, we know this very well, that many people really was invisible in our situation after starting the Russian aggression in 2014. Now, we all know that we need to talk not only about the full-scale invasion, but we need to talk about this long period when our country and our society perceive what it means to live during the wartime, do you live in war conditions, and when we first faced with this situation of forced migration. And this problem on invisibility of many people are very important for understanding when we talk about the refugeeism and when we talk about the forced migration. Then, obtaining refugee statuses provides a person with a protection under the law of the host country, while persons who have not crossed a border require permission from very political authorities who may be responsible for the displacement. It's other very important point, and if we talk on Ukrainian situation, especially after 2014, when our country firstly in their history faced with this problem of massive forced migration, we faced with this problem of communication between our political authorities and IDPs, and it's a long period of fighting for our rights. It's a very important, and then I come back to this issue and we will talk about this. Then, in situation of internal displacement, people face a range of constraints due to different opportunities in the areas of political rights, property, access to health services, and due to attitudes towards IDPs and society in general. It's other very important list of very important points, and my main focus may be in this point are very important because I work with this fighting for political rights. Maybe you don't know about this fact, but before 2020, we are starting from 2014, and before 2020, IDPs in Ukraine have not right to vote on the local, to take a part on local election. It's a so long time for fighting for political rights. It's a limitation of political right, but we are talking about people who were and are a citizen of one country. We are all citizens of Ukraine. We all have Ukrainian passports. But before 2020, we have not tried to take a part in a local election. Then, if we are talking about the property, it has a very big problem when we talk about our situation. For example, in my personal case, 9th year, I have not access to my flat in Donetsk. I have not right to deal with this problem, unfortunately. And the other part of this problem, very important problem, and maybe we will talk about this, in Ukraine we have a very specific system of registration, which we inherited from the Soviet past. It changed a little bit, but the sense of this policy of registration still exists and very, very similar to previous Soviet type. What it means? In my passport, I still have a registration that I'm registered in Donetsk. And in each step, when I communicate with our authorities, with different kind of institutions, especially with bank system, in each step, I'm asked about additional documents which prove my statuses like a citizen of Ukraine. It's a very big problem. We still have this problem in our society. Then, access of health services, maybe it's not so obvious here, but I will talk about the reform, medical reform, and from my point of view, after 2014, we had a very successful reform in this field. And due to attitude towards IDP in society, it's a very important moment because it's other detail which are very important for understanding of this situation, which are connected to perception of our IDP in society. It's connected to the naming. How? What terms we use when we talk about something. In Ukraine, before 2018, we called the situation in the east part of Ukraine ATO, anti-terroristic operation, not war. It's very important, before 2018. Only issued a law in 2018 give us the right to talk about the war in our country. From 2014 and before 2018. It's 4 years. It's a long period when in the society you have not right to talk about the war. We are victims of the war, but we had not right to talk about the war. Of course, we says that we are victims of the war, but we need to official support in this situation, and only in 2018 we received this official support. And if you call something anti-terroristic operation, of course it's created some troubles for people who are connected to this situation, because in your imagination you could build a picture that some terrorists which exist in the east part of Ukraine do something, and why we have this anti-terroristic operation. But then of course we make step by step, and our society are talking about this, that it's usually take a time. We are not ready to such situation. It was, on the one hand, maybe expected, this Russian aggression, but on the other hand, no one had a chance to believe this. It was a very big surprise for many people in Ukraine that Russia started aggression against Ukraine in 2014. And of course, many of Ukrainians not expected that they started a full-scale invasion. On the one hand, we know, but on the other hand, it was very difficult to believe in this. And it takes time. It usually takes time, and it takes so long time for us when we start talking about this situation like about a war, when we start talking about situation like a limitation of right of people, etc., etc., etc. And then, all of this activates one of the principles of assistance and protecting IDPs, sovereignty as responsibility. This idea has two essential parts. Governments are responsible for the human rights of their citizens as part of the essence of statehood. When they are unwilling or unable to provide for the security and well-being for their citizens, and international responsibility arises to protect vulnerable individuals. And it's other very interesting aspect of this situation, how our society reacted to this situation of starting Russian invasion in 2014, and how international organizations start their activity in Ukrainian context and connected to this situation in east part of Ukraine, connecting to the situation of starting of Russian aggression. In the process of protecting of the rights of IDP, their own agency will also play an important role. And maybe we'll talk about this phenomenon of agency. Where we are in the whole picture, if we are talking about the whole processes in the world, as you can see here, according to these data, we see this increasing of the number of people, of the number of IDPs, and here we see this differentiation between the people who moved because of the conflict and violence and who moved because of disaster. And unfortunately for us, now Ukrainians become a part of this statistic. And why it's so important from our point of view, because usually tragedy gives you an experience. I says unfortunately, because it's not so very good experience, but unfortunately we have this experience. And specific of our case, give us the right to talk about something that we found during these 8 years from starting of Russian aggression and before starting the full-scale Russian aggression. And then, when I'm thinking about this topic, about the IDPs and how we work with this situation starting in 2014, I start thinking about the previous experience. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, we have a different kind of experience, but we don't learn these lessons. And I think it makes sense to talk about the role of Chernobyl nuclear accident. It was play a very important role because, as you know, it was a huge part of the transformation processes in the Soviet Union. It was happened on the territory of Ukraine. And here we have first maybe experience how to relocate people. And on this photo you see a Slavutic. It's a very interesting case for study. It's a city which was created because of this needness to forcibly relocated people. And it was maybe last Soviet project. Why I talk about Soviet project? Because all Soviet republics built a separate district in the city, and they are very different with ethnic moment on the buildings. It's really a very interesting case. But unfortunately, this topic, because it's happened in the Soviet time, this topic was very close for discussion, and unfortunately we don't learn this lesson from this forced relocation in the last years before the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then, for example, it's other topic which we usually silent. It's because of deep economical crisis in 90s. We have this phenomenon of dying cities in the region. It's the east part of Ukraine. Why it's so important? Because it's very important for understanding what's happened on this territory. Why people in different way reacted to this starting of Russian invasion in 2014. Because people perceive this experience of forced relocation in 90s. When they are city, we usually, in this situation, we are talking about monofunctional cities. And during the crisis, all these factories or plants stopped their activity, stopped doing anything, and people found themselves in absolutely died territory. This photo, it's not after the war. It's from 90s. But it's look like during the war, like photos from the war. And of course, it's other experience of forced relocation in our country, but we still have not any lesson. We don't receive any information from this experience. And I think partially we could talk about the migration, labor migration from the west part of the country because of the economical crisis. And it's other experience when people partially forcibly relocated, and why it's so important. But we have not enough reflection under all of these processes, and unfortunately, in this way, we were not ready to what happens in 2014. The massive internal displacement in Ukraine associated with the start of Russian aggression in 2014 had a greatest transformative potential for Ukraine. Why? Because we are talking about many people. We talk about numbers and facts, and now I propose you to talk about these numbers and facts. Now we have a absolutely correct date of starting the war. We know that our first wave of the Russian aggression started on 20 of February 2014. And the other very important for me moment, now we could talk about this first wave of Russian aggression. Why it's so important? When we try to thinking about what's happened with our country after 2014, it's much more easy to talk about something that have the start at that finalize in some moment. the starting of full-scale aggression finalizes first wave, first stage of Russian aggression in our country. And here, if we are talking about this first stage or first wave of Russian aggression, we could talk about the two cases. First, the soft, without use of weapon, occupation of the Crimea Peninsula. And here, very often, the specialists use this term bloodless, because here we have 6 killed people and 10 disappeared in the moment of occupation of Crimea Peninsula. But what's happened after that, it's other conversation. And second, the Russian invasion of parts of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, accompanied by imitation of internal civil conflict and referendums, which led to formation of this quasi-state formation, DPR and LPR, and according to the Ukrainian law, which were issued in 2018, when we start talking about the war, we start talking about the about these entities like collaborative regimes and collaborants who are represent the Russian invasion here in this region. Then, we need to understand, if we're talking about this transformative potential, we need to understand about what numbers of the people we are talking here. With the beginning of Russian aggression in 2014, more than 2 million people have left the uncontrolled territories of Ukraine and were forced to move both to other parts of Ukraine and beyond its border. According to the Ministry of Social Policy, after 2015 and before the full-scale Russian invasion, the number of registered internally displaced persons was relatively stable at around 1.5 million. Residents of war-torn territories have also been fleeing the country since 2014. As of December 2015, in the countries that have common borders with Ukraine, such as Russia, Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Moldova, there were near 400,000 Ukrainians seeking refuge and more than 700,000 people who seeking other forms of legal stay. And the estimated population of the occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk region is 3.7 million. It's also a very important moment because very often when we talk about the situation after 2014, we miss this information about people who are still citizens of Ukraine and who are still live on this occupied territory. And they still need to have the help from the side of the state. It was very, very important for us when we conducted an interview with people who live on this occupied territory. They're waiting for support from Ukraine, and they very often talk about themselves like about the citizens of Ukraine. And I work with under the subject of identity. And in this case, we are talking about the civil identity. And when they talk about their belonging to Ukrainian states, it's a declaration of their real belonging to the state, and it's a question about the protections of their rights. They are questioning the state. They question why you are not support us in this situation. But we still have this number of people, of course, they in different way perceived the situation. And of course, now we have a very big problem with population on this territory because here people might have near 5 or 6 passports. I don't know, maybe you know how it's possible. Really, it's 3 passports, but it's a possibility to have an additional passport for going abroad. It's Ukrainian passport, official Ukrainian, you're belonging to Ukrainian states. And then, according to Ukrainian law, you have a right to have 2 international passports. It's 3 passports. Then many of people who find themselves on occupied territories in Crimea Peninsula and Donetsk region, they need to solve their different kind of question connected to the property, etc., and they receive the Russian passports. And according to Russian law, they have a right to have additional international passports. And it's a passport of this quasi-state formation, DPR and LPR. And I think it's a very big problem for future because here we are talking about belonging to some state spaces and how to deal with this problem when we talk about people who have so many passports, which are proved they are belonging to different kind of territories, including the occupied territories. And I think it's a task for future for Ukrainian states. It's a very important task for future. But we're still talking about the citizens of Ukraine who live on occupied territory, and the state need to be responsible towards these people. I only want to give you an illustration. Now, unfortunately, in Ukraine, we have so many illustrations of this, but it's from interview after 2014. It's one woman from the Счастье. I need to translate the name of the city for you. It's happiness. Happiness, счастье. It's the name of the city, and look like Ukrainian happiness look like. Now on this photo you can find this. Up to the last moment I sat here, and then already as it became terrible and I understand that is no sense to sit here, wait and be afraid. We were hidden in cellars, in a bathroom, a toilet. I covered a window with mattresses, pillows, which splinters have not got on the children when the wave goes, then still covered on children by mattresses. I sat in the locker. I have a small locker on the kitchen, and here I sat, and children were in a room. And we have so many evidence why and how, in what condition people made this decision about forced relocation. Of course, many of them waiting for some change, believe that everything will be okay, and postponed their relocation. But unfortunately, after such type of experience, many of them are forced to move to other part of Ukraine. Here you can find information about the number of IDPs. Here you can see only officially registered IDPs in Ukraine. It's absolutely open sources. You can find this information on the site of Social Policy of Ukraine. But my colleague very well visualized this in the processes from the beginning, from 2014 and before the present day. As you can see here, in the initial stage, we have near 2 million of people who forcibly displaced, and then it was some stabilization of the number of IDPs in Ukraine, and usually we are talking about 1.5 million people in Ukraine who officially registered. But it's only officially registered IDPs, but we have a huge number of people who avoid registration for many reasons, and in our interview we collected the reasons why people avoid this official registration. It's a really very different reasons. On the one hand, people don't want to put their problems to the states, because we very well understand that it's a very problematic situation for all states. And on the other hand, we have many other reasons, because people afraid of stigmatization, afraid that afraid of this perception of IDPs in Ukrainian society before issuing this law. When we start talking about the war, when we start talking about the victims in the war, it's so many different reasons staying behind this avoiding of official registration. Then, on this slide, you can find the information, and I think it makes sense to look on these maps in comparison. On the left side of the screen, you see the visualization of the number of IDPs after 2014. And as you can see here, the people prefer and choose the location very close to split line, very close to the battlefield in this case. Why it's? We are working with their motives too in this case. We asked people about the choosing of this place. And on the one hand, of course, we need to talk here about their Russian-speaking territories, because it was much more easy for people from occupied part of Donetsk and Lugansk region to be very close to the split line, because it's a culturally very closed territories of Ukraine on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's absolutely rational decision. In this situation, we faced with situation of dividing families. And many people want to stay very close to split line, because in this case they have an access to this territory that might help to their relatives. They might support their, very often in this situation we are talking about older people, because on the level of this making decision we see and we found sacrificing practices. What I mean in this case, when older generation give a chance to younger generation to survive, to go to other part of Ukraine. And many representatives of whole generation prefer to stay here because it's not enough money for whole family, for relocation for whole the family. And why we have this division between the old generation and young generation, and many representative of old generation stay on occupied territory after 2014. And as you can see on the right side of the map, at the current situation in the initial stage, after the starting of full-scale aggression, as you can see here, many people moved as far as it possible from the war zone conflict. It's absolutely different situation. And then, this map is very important for understanding of the situation after 2014. United Nations published this map in 2015 and give not only information about the number of IDP, but about the structure of IDP. And this deep green, it's a people of retirement age. And you see a difference between regions. The people who decided to start their new life in new territories goes far from the east part of Ukraine. But many people of retirement age were situated very close to their homes, to their flats. And here we are faced with other very specific problem of Ukraine, and why Ukraine so slowly solved a problem of IDPs, because we have many IDPs of retirement age who really lived on occupied territory, but time to time goes to Ukraine for receiving a pension. It's a very big problem. It's still about the human rights in our country, because we have a solidarity system in Ukraine, and they have right to have this pension. But unfortunately, and now we face with a very similar situation on the occupied part of Ukraine, when Russia blocked a mobile connection and blocked an access to Ukrainian bank system. And unfortunately, it's created a very specific situation. On the one hand, if you talk about situation in 2014, people haven't access to pension because the pension perceived like a part of the local budget. But then situation changes. Now we have this two-side situation. When we see this blocking from the Russian side, and when we see this problem, but now it's much more easy. Why I talk about this transformational potential of this first wave of IDPs in Ukraine? Because we change a lot in our society, and the situation with pensions is still problematic, but now it's much more easy for many current IDPs after starting a full-scale aggression to solve different kind of their problem. Now we have our state in smartphone, and many of them, many of current IDPs don't need to stay in queues waiting for something. It's possible to upload your documents via smartphone and receive their help from the states. It's become more easy, and now it's not about humiliating procedure, but unfortunately after 2014 we faced with this humiliating procedure for many people who tried to fight for their rights. Then it's very interesting, and if you wish go deeper, it's a very good app. It's a very good app with information. It's possible to check each month how many people go across the border. It's in interactive maps, which are very well worked. And here I make a two-print screen for you only to show this situation, because it's very important to see how pandemic changed the situation. Because many people depend on this receiving of a Ukrainian pension. And as you can see here, during the pandemic time, before the pandemic time, we have more than million crossing the border per month. During the pandemic time, as you can see, only 2,000 people who goes across the border because border was closed. It was absolutely impossible to have an access to receiving the money. It creates a different kind of shadow businesses around this, and people will depend on this situation, unfortunately. And here we could talk about the right of these people. And I want to show you several pictures. I conducted my interview on 0 point. It's really 0 point. It's a split line between controlled by Ukraine territory of Lugansk district, Luganskaya Oblast, and uncontrolled by Ukrainian government. And people staying in the very long quiz, and we asked them in our interview how many time it usually takes, and they says it's from 2 hours to several days. And try to imagine this. When I was here, it was in the summer. It was plus 30, 35 degrees, and it's mostly about old people who are staying in this long queues and waiting for this right to go across the border. And as you can see here, it's not only crossing the border because they need to receive their pension, and we find many different kind of trans-border businesses. We're still talking about the people who need to survive because of this situation, and many of our pensioners check the prices, where is medication cheaper on the Ukrainian side, on the face, and it was very, very important for understanding this. Then, if you are talking about the current situation, it's other theme. As you see, with starting of full-scale aggression, we have more than 6 million people who moved from their places of living, and then in several months, we see that many people come back to their previous location because of liberation of some Ukrainian territories. And why it's so difficult to talk about the numbers when we talk about the current situation, because it's all in the dynamic. It's each day the number of people who moved from one location to other are changed. And in this case, it's possible to talk only about their other characteristic of this forced relocation. As you can see here, for example, in January 2023, average duration of displacement among IDPs in Ukraine was 229 days. And 83% of current IDPs in Ukraine have been displaced for 3 months or longer. It's a little bit give you an understanding of the situation, how it's happened now, but people moved and choose a new location. It totally depends on the situation on the front line. As you see here, in the morning, I upload the map of hostilities in Ukraine. As you can see here, the part of Ukraine was liberated, and now we have this eastern and southern part where we still have hostilities, and it creates some troubles for people who are represent this territory. And little bit, I understand that I have the last minutes of my presentation, but I want to talk about this transformation potential of this first wave of Ukrainian migrants here. And significant number of IDPs, we talk about millions of people, and this significant number of IDPs, both consciously and unconsciously, because we are not recognized what we are doing here, we are only fighting for their rights, have become agent of change. The Ukrainian state system in 2014 was faced with a one-time resettlement of millions of people who had to deal with their own problems in the new environment. The mass and systematic nature of appeals to state structure created the ground to the necessary change. And as you can see here, I put here several faces who represent this change. For example, Uliana Suprun, she is Americans of Ukrainian descent who came to Ukraine and who deal with Ukrainian medical system, and from my point of view make a lot for Ukrainian system. And now if before starting their forced relocation, we have an access to medical system according to our registration. But of course, after 2 million people applying and ask about services in other locations, we need to change the system. And I think now we have this change. And then Tatiana Durneva, she is represent a civil organization, a group of influence, and she is fighting for right for IDPs to take part in the election on the local level. And she was absolutely successful in this, but it takes so much time in Ukrainian society. And what we have now, we still have we were successful in many cases, but we still have now a series of problems. It's a lack of affordable and accessible accommodation and lack of social housing. In Ukraine, we have not social housing, and why it still creates some problem for many IDPs, for previous and for current IDPs in Ukraine. Then we have an issue with pension and benefits, but we have a very big difference with situation after 2014 and now. The lack of recognition of the benefits of mental health support, because we're still in the process of reformation of our medical system, and especially if you talk about the mental health support. And we still have issues with the employment of people of pre-retirement age. It's a 50 plus. It's absolutely impossible now to find a job for people who has several years before starting of their pension. And it's about stigmatization, but I want to talk absolutely last word about the agency of internally displaced person. why it's so important? Because people need to solve their problem and they start doing something. And IDPs were very actively involved in this process of fighting for their rights. And why we have this absolutely unique phenomenon. On the one hand, it's activity of the victims of this situation, because IDPs know very well what they need to receive in this situation, for what they need to fight. And on the other hand, we have absolutely unique situation in Ukrainian society when not only established civil organization, but spontaneous volunteering help started. And it was very, very important that we have this phenomenon of spontaneous volunteering help, which are not registered, but they are very actively functioning in Ukrainian society. And in the end of my presentation, I only want to show this. I like this map so much. It's my friend Vitaly Rudenki who put the information on the map, and this map brilliantly show how it's look like in Ukraine. And I think this map gives you an answer why Ukrainian society reacted on the full-scale invasion in such way. We were ready because of this long period of our training after the starting of Russian aggression in 2014. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Oksana, for giving a voice to internally displaced people and actually showing what the situation is, what are the challenges, how the local and also the state policies has also changed with the time, and what is left to do. And there is a lot of issues that we can address in the discussion now. But we also have a mayor from Rivne, from the municipality in the northwest of Ukraine, Alexander Trechak, that came in person to Norway, to Oslo, and those who are going to participate in Norwegian local government summit tomorrow and day after tomorrow. You also will meet Alexander there. But what we can see from also other surveys, as for example, survey done by the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of Council of Europe, when they have asked municipalities in Ukraine to answer to the question, what is the role of local governments when it comes to IDPs? And 90% of local governments have responded that this is actually the link between the volunteers, non-governmental organizations, and also the link between supply and demand when it comes to the IDP issues. And when local governments in Ukraine were also asked what are the main issues when it comes to the external support, what would needs be, and this was a survey made at the end of last year. So on the first place was shelters, on the second place was accommodation for IDPs and the local residents. The next in the line was overcoming unemployment, and the next one is integration of IDPs and access to all local government services. And Rivne is one of the municipalities hosting not only internally displaced people, but also internally displaced local governments. And Alexandra will tell you about this more. But before we hear from Alexandra, we also will watch a video made by Rivne municipality. Please.
Because of war, thousands of Ukrainians lost their homes and were forced to leave their towns and cities. These people were looking for shelter in the relatively safe places all over, fleeing from the war. City of Rivne became a reliable place for those displaced people coming from different parts of Ukraine during the war. Our city hosted more than 22,000 of them. We arranged efficient accommodations for them, and on an ongoing basis we meet their basic needs by providing necessary things, along with some food, hygiene, baby formula, clothing and bedding. 260 children from those IDPs attend local public school. Altogether, since the beginning of the war, 775 of the displaced children joined local educational institutions. 150 children rested in the summer camp that we named Canaan. We continuously provide medical care to the IDPs in healthcare facilities of the Rivne City Council. Thanks to the support of the charitable funds, internally displaced persons, if necessary, receive medicines free of charge. Since the introduction of martial law, there were 16,564 medical care cases initiated by the displaced persons in medical care institutions of the Rivne City Council. 987 people received inpatient treatment, and IDPs women delivered 136 babies in the Rivne Maternity Hospital. IDPs got a chance to register for additional financial assistance from the Czech humanitarian organization Man in Need, along with some help provided by the UN's World Food Programme. We had a project of a social diner where IDPs paid half of the cost of the food. We have organized a social hub with a warm room for the winter cold weather on one of the main squares, and more than 10,000 displaced people used their services. At another social hub located on Vidinska Street, 15,000 people were served. We have opened a social initiative called I Am Mariupol in our city. It was our community that adopted and supports the Kremina City Council. Relocated administration can now use some office space with us. Lugansk Medical University was relocated to Rivne. Rivne became a refugee shelter for some animals from the combat areas. Together with the Rivne City Society called Prosvita, we introduced some Ukrainian language training for the immigrants coming from different areas. We opened those classes for the fourth time now, allowing over 100 IDPs improving their language skills. Rivne warmly hosts those who fled here from the war, and we daily contribute to our victory by supporting Ukrainians who were forced to start their new life from the very beginning all over again.
Thank you one more time. I want to express my gratefulness especially for KS and for everybody who was involved in organization this event. And thank you so much for the Norway government that constantly support Ukraine in this war. Yes, I was impressed by the speech of Mrs. Oksana, and everything she spoke was in my heart and in my mind as well. And I have to say, everything I will speak, this is not from paper, not from some materials I read. I come here from the ground. As a mayor, I here want to share with you everything we passed through this very difficult year, extremely difficult year. And as for IDP person, we decided in our city that we will not call people who come to our city, we will not call them IDPs. In Ukrainian, this is VPO, внутрішньо переміщені особи. So we want to call them locals, So they already ours. We warmly host them and want treat them as much as we can. That's why from the very first days of the war, we started working with such categories of people. As for me, my experience was started 2014 when Russia started its aggression at the east of Ukraine. Donetsk region, Donetsk, Lugansk regions, when Crimea was occupied. And I was there as a volunteer. I was there not officially. I was not representing not any volunteer organization, but as Mrs. Oksana already told, this is spontaneous volunteering mission. So personally me, I visited the most dangerous location at that time, 2014, 15, 16, and so on. And this is our experience. And of course, at that time, it was called ATO, anti-terroristic operation. Of course, Russia called what they are doing right now in Ukraine SVO or SMIO, Special Military Operation. At that time, it was hybrid war. They started in Crimea, 2014, and now they are trying to pretend that this is like some special operation, and they don't want to call it war. But my appeal to world society, this is real war. This is not a conflict, this is not a crisis, this is a war. And Ukrainians passed through this year, and they already knows very well how it looks like and how it feels like. In our city we have officially registered the most number of officially registered IDP. It was 23,000. But as Mrs. Oksana already mentioned, that some of them, they don't want it to be registered, and they, in some way, they avoid registration. So we believe that in our city, by the statistic and by the phones and by the way we research, in the Rivne we have around 30,000 people who were forced to leave their homes. Also, I have to mention about our locals, Rivne people. From the very first days of the war, 8,000 children were moved to European countries, different European countries. So you just can imagine, in the city of Rivne we have 32,000 of kids of schooling age who visit in our schools. 32,000 just who visit schools, and 8,000 of them they left the city, moved to European countries with parents and relatives. So also we have to remember about these people, and by the September 1st more than 5,000 children with the parents returned back to Rivne. So right now we have probably 2,500 children with relatives, with mothers that still abroad. Yes, as it was mentioned, we also have in our city 2 local administrations from Luhansk area that we host now. Dobrobylia, and city of Kremina. City of Kremina, this is right on the front lines right now, and there are a very hard battlefield and fights for this city right now. But we have such experience when administration of city of Kremina, you just can imagine the very first days of the war, and suddenly I received on my phone a call, and Mrs. Natalia Makuhon, at the time she was a deputy mayor, she's calling to me and asking, Mr. Mayor, we just left our city and we don't know yet where we're going to. Could you receive us? We are a number of people, we have such techniques, we have such things with ourselves, so okay, welcome to Rivne. So right now, two administrations of the Ukrainian cities working in the city of Rivne, and they try to keep all processes in the city Kremina working, as it was mentioned, to provide people who still there with basic needs. And also we are waiting that very soon this city will be liberated, Kremina, and this administration will be coming back to their native homes.
And Alexander, tomorrow we are going to Fredrikstad in the very early morning to meet the political leadership in Fredrikstad municipality.
Yeah.
And we are talking about the possible cooperation between municipalities. As we now talk about IDPs, and I don't know exactly how many Ukrainians now have been settled in Fredrikstad. We will learn about this tomorrow. But I was just thinking, when you will speak to the vice mayor of Fredrikstad, what would be like your proposal for possible cooperation when we talk about the IDP issues? Would you have? Could you mention what could Norwegian municipalities do to assist Ukrainian municipalities, those who are receiving Ukrainians from other parts of the country?
Yes, of course. We have couple problems that we have to solve with. For example, first of all, electricity. This is the main issue we have right now, not only for IDP, but for our locals as well, because Russians destroyed totally our electricity stations. So, and we were lack of electricity, and electrical generators, the stuff that provide us with electricity, vitally needed for any type of category in our city, and especially IDPs as well. This is the first one, and the second one, housing. Yeah, we still need some ideas how to solve the problem of housing, because many people just come to our cities, and right now at this moment they decided, so we will stay here and we will not return in anywhere. We want to live here, but for example, our house on occupied territory totally destroyed, and we have no return to. So we are looking for possibility for common programs for housing and building reconstructions for IDP to be accommodated in.
Are there any questions or comments that from people watching us on YouTube? No, not yet. Then please remember that you can, those who are watching us online, that you can put questions in writing in chat. But we have a question here in the meeting room. Irina,
Irina Sabor. I would like to ask you about the education opportunities for the internally displaced people. What is the situation in Ukraine, but also in Rivne in particular? Do you how these children that are joining the new classrooms, how are they integrating? Are there any challenges? You mentioned the Ukrainian courses. Are there mental health issues? How do you help the children to accommodate, to integrate in the new places? And another question is whether you have the experience, especially in Rivne, with the displaced schools. Are there any displaced schools that operate from Rivne? Thank you.
Good question, because again, it has some relation with electricity. Because if you have no any electricity, no matter what school or what category of people you belong to, you have no any opportunity to provide or supply the schooling. So that's why our schools were provided with reconstructed bomb shelters, and right now we have pretty good bomb shelters that helps us to provide and continue schooling and education in our schools. Second point, of course, we treat well all parents with kids who need good quality education in our city. And of course, right now we have more than 700 kids that are getting some education in our schools. Unfortunately, we have no any experience that schools, you mean schools that relocated to our city, yes? We have no such experience, only individuals can get access to education. And I have mentioned that we have such experience when some children from occupied territory decided to have education on our Rivne schools through internet. Of course, this is a very dangerous situation because they are under the pressure there. If in such area that occupied, it will be known that kids are studying in our Ukrainian schools, in Rivne especially, so that's a big threat for them.
Can I add several ideas?
Please, Oksana.
Thank you very much. It's really a very important question for us, and I think we need to think about our educational system not only in the context of full-scale war, but in much more wider context. I mean, the previous experience with pandemic time, and I think Ukraine was very successful in this case because we have a broadcasting. We have a series of lessons for children which are translated by TV. And I think it's an absolutely unique experience for Ukraine, but unfortunately now you understand how it's difficult to organize everything during the full-scale invasion, because now we are talking about very limited access not only to internet but to electricity at all. And unfortunately, these previous experiences are not working in the current situation. And why now we need to find a new solution for this problem. And now I think the civil activity, it's only one way how we can solve many problems in Ukrainian society. It's so many volunteering in Ukrainian society which are connected to this issue with educated people, how to help them.
One more, as for education, I want to mention as well about relocation of Luhansk Medical University to Rivne. So on our basis, on our clinical basis, we just gave them opportunity to work in Rivne, and now they are integrating successfully in our city system, and they already have quite a lot of students from our region, from neighboring regions, and we have a plan to help them to increase the number of students, and they give a quite good education.
But unfortunately in Ukraine we have a situation with, for example, universities which are relocated from Donetsk Oblast, for example, to Mariupol. It's the same Donetsk Oblast, but under the control of the Ukrainian. And it's a second experience for university. It's a forced relocation, but then it's a totally destroyed university.
The same with Luhansk.
Yeah, the same, absolutely. Yeah.
In 2014, they moved to Severodonetsk, and then from Severodonetsk, they were forced to move to
It's a
Rivne.
separate, a very important case. It's related to universities. It's other stories.
I also can ask the question. First of all, I would like to thank for our guests for these fascinating presentations. And I have the question to Alexander. We know that from November 2022, the network of points of resilience, Punkty Nezlamnosti, was established in Ukraine, where people can come and, for example, charge the gadgets or to get the access to the internet, to get the access to the electricity and so on. I'm just wondering, and I know that there is an opportunity for international organizations to establish these points, yes, or just to support somehow this network. And also it's open for the business initiatives. So I have these practical questions. How do you experience this project? And maybe you see some perspective for international investments, especially regarding this project in Ukraine.
Yes, of course. This was a quite needed things that we started, especially in Rivne, before it became mainstream. I started to organize such points in our city on summertime. Can you imagine when summertime, very hot weather, and I start to install big tents and let's say hot spots for people, and some people were like, is it needed or not? So we were first city in Ukraine probably that started to do it, and then it became like a mainstream. So I invited many organizations, charitable organizations as well, and right now in the city of Rivne we have probably the biggest one tent that hosted more than 15,000 people. They feed people every day, especially IDPs as well, and this is like international organization Remar SOS, and they really do amazing work. And also in the city we have 31 such spots where people can get access to internet connection, they can get access to information, what's going on around, if there is no any electricity or internet access, or any news, hot drinks, hot food, and so on. So such projects like this are very vital, needed, and especially right now. This is a March. But now we are preparing for a very hot summer, and I'm already started preparing for next winter season. This is only March, but I'm thinking now about coming winter season. In summertime, we are afraid that Russians will destroy our water supply system in our cities. That's why we need many water, just clean water, and different ideas and solutions how to provide big city. In our city we have 251,000 people. This is quite big city. How to provide needs of these people with water supply. And of course we're thinking about next winter and cold season. We do hope that we get the victory until the winter, and we wanna win this war as soon as possible, but we have to think ahead.
Thanks to both of you for very interesting presentations where you brought a lot of new information that I didn't know about. I would like to ask you, both of you, about the coordination of all of these initiatives, because you have a very, very strong civil society, and you have mentioned already various civil society groups, you have international donors, and so on. How does the local government make sure that this support is as efficient as possible, that the money goes to the right places and so on? So could you tell a bit more about the practical coordination activities that takes place in both in Rivne but also more generally?
How you wish. You start.
Okay, of course, in our city we start the City Council of IDP. So this council unite all very active IDP people and organizations already, and NGO that started during this year in our city. So we are very close working together, and we consider each other as a partners. So during this year we established really good active connection, and we have some centers like I Am Mariupol, that helps to provide everything they need, and many cooperation. And I guess you have to be sure that everything that's related with IDP, with people in need, working well in our city and in other cities as well. And of course, reports that we receive from them, we share it and exchange it. So every month in our city council we try and come together and solve problems they have and cooperate.
Maybe I answer to your question in a little bit pathetic way, because I take a part in one conference, and my colleague from Poland, which are very actively involved in volunteering in Poland now, when they tried to deal with this problem of huge number of Ukrainian refugees in Poland. And she says that now in Poland we have a very interesting phenomenon when we create in one civil organization Polish people. I think the same situation now we have in Ukraine. We create a one civil organization. It's possible to talk that it's whole Ukrainian society. We have absolutely new level of trust in Ukrainian society, and many of this volunteering activity are realized on the level of absolutely spontaneous organization. I know how it's work. When I called to my friend and says, my previous students ask me about the driver and bus for people with problem of mobility. Could you help me? And he says, yes. I call to them. It's absolutely unique phenomenon when all society actively involved in these processes. And it's a very big surprise for us that it's work. It's a work in scheme. Absolutely.
Yes, I have to add something, that from the very first hours, not weeks or months,
hours.
Very first hours, I use social media. My page on Facebook became like a very informational spot. Like everything that's happened in my city was on my Facebook page. And when a full-scale invasion started at 4 a.m., at 4 a.m. I already was with our military administration, with our militaries, with police, and everybody who responsible for the security in the city. And we were speaking about situation and so on. At 5, at 6, I already have the very first meetings with my deputies. I have to mention that we were ready to receive IDP much more before. So we already have a clear planning what we have to do, how many people we are ready to receive and host, and so on. So at 7 a.m. I already was online on Facebook and just reporting people about situation in the city. And every day, at least twice a day, I was sharing very important information with the city. I was walking around the city among the people, and by my example that I'm here, we have no any panic. We don't rush anywhere. We have to be together. And I just ask people. So my deputy mayor, she will be responsible for this direction. So here we have a big building, like we call it people's home or people's house in the city of Rivne. So we choose this building, and everybody just we're trying to brought everything they want. Some kind of help for militaries, some kind of help for refugees or IDPs and so on. You know, I remember this feeling. I would love to repeat it one more time. This is so incredible feeling in your heart and mind when you see whole society just raise up, and there is no any obstacles for everybody. You can help for each other. Me as a mayor, I was at the same time as a volunteer as well. I was like a military at the same time. I was like official at the same time. I was like a psychologist at the same time, because I've got so many calls when people were calling to me, especially when we have lack of electricity. Can you imagine 2 a.m. Hello, Mr. Mayor. We still have no electricity. Can you help us? And when I started to tell them, me too, I have no too. Right now we're just working on solving this problem. And people on that line, oh, thank you so much. You are like psychologists for us, because when we are just speaking with you, sorry for troubling you, but we don't know how to call to everything else. 5 a.m. again, a lot of calls, and people like were trying to help. And you know, my phone, I have to say, my phone quite open, and I couldn't reject any call, because at the very difficult time, I'm like, I'm ready to put my life as a sacrifice for the victory's sake. And you know, this is what we are passed through. This is what we are speaking to from the ground.
I think Alexander described a very other very important phenomenon in Ukrainian society. We have a very small distance between the Ukrainians and authorities. Now, because of the social networking, and it's only one click, it's only one call, and you are on the distance. Oh, where am I electricity, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
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 We have 2 questions, right? Then we take them both at the same time, so we are running out of time, but we have time here. So, Natalia?
Yeah, Natalia Yeremeyeva, the European Workland Center. Thanks so much to both of you for these inspiring presentations. I was just wondering about one thing. About a month ago, Irina Vereshchuk, the Minister of Reintegration of the Temporary Occupied Territories, presented what is now called the strategy on, or the national strategy on IDPs. And probably for the first time since 2014, there is so much emphasis on integration there. So I would like to ask both of you, probably Oksana more from the researcher's perspective and Alexander more from the practitioner's perspective, what the integration of IDPs in Ukraine should be based on. Okay. Thank you.
While you are thinking, so we take another question, and then you could answer in both of them. Please, put your question.
I remember, my name is Yulia Presnyakova. I'm an internally displaced person from Ukraine. I came to Norway in late August. So I remember the big problem in western regions of Ukraine, that prices for flats and apartments went up, like more and more up during this full-scale invasion. And for example, I lived in Odessa and moved to Lviv. So it was impossible to find a flat in Lviv. And I'm very lucky because the channel that I worked to, they accommodated me. But at the last months, I tried to find a flat, not even in Lviv, but in Rivne as well, and in south, more on south. And how did you manage this problem? Could you manage this problem of the prices that went up so high? Because I remember the case of Lviv mayor. He was he found out quite a simple decision. Like we have the line. If you have these cases of high prices, you can call to the administration and we will manage something. So then it was managed half because like prices went down half. How could you manage this problem in Rivne?
Okay, thank you for your questions. I guess from research, answer for the first question, and then I will answer for both questions. Okay,
but I'm ready to ask you both questions too.
Yeah.
First about strategy, maybe several comments. I'm really happy that we now start talking on the level of strategy, because of in the initial step we have a very big mistake in rhetoric towards the IDPs. What I mean in this case, for example, I'm involved in many discussion and conference how to integrate IDPs in Ukrainian society. In this case, I asked where I'm from. I'm Ukrainian society. And now we change this rhetoric, and it's very good that we start to talk about on the level of strategy. But what is very important for me, during our interview, we found this strategy, I call it a postponed life. Many IDP postpone their lives. They are waiting when situation resolved and something back to the previous life, etc., etc. And this postponing life a very dangerous strategy, because people are not integrated in the place where they live. And I think it's experience which are very important not only for Ukraine, but it's important now for whole Europe, which are invited and which are faced with this problem of big number of people who relocated, forcibly relocated, and it's very important to integrate them and avoid this strategy of postponed life. And about the prices, it's absolutely normal situation when millions of people try to find a new place for their live. Of course, you couldn't find any flats, but in Lviv, for example, because I'm from Lviv, I was in Lviv when full-scale invasion started, and I know how it's organized. On the one hand, of course, we have people who try to use the situation and receive the money for their flats, but I know so many people who open their homes for people who goes across Lviv, who try to find something in this. My flat, during half a year, working like a hub for many people who goes across the Lviv, absolutely without any money. We have two sides of this situation, of course, but it's a normal reaction of people. We are not, we are different. We are different and we reacted in different way. But I know very well how it was organized in Lviv when many schools were retransformed for people who relocated, in many other places, and many city dwellers opened their homes for people who forcibly relocated in this time. It's both
Alexander,
sides.
Yes.
short.
It's usually.
Yeah,
It's not
so
necessary.
the same problem we were speaking in our city as well. Of course, from our side, we do our best to provide such people with all they need. Of course, there are a private business, real estate business, and so on. And people were free to choose. Or if I have some resources and I can rent an apartment, or I will choose a housing that I receive from local government or city council, or I can just freely use what we have, like from charitable funds, from churches. I have mentioned about big role of different churches, different denominations that were hosting a lot of people and given just for free. And I personally know private people who were just given apartments just for free, and even now. As for integration, Mrs. Vereshchuk just 2 weeks ago, she visited Rivne as well, and we were speaking about integration, of course. Of course, here we have such situation. We're ready to integrate such people in our community, but yeah, we offer all tools, all instruments. We have private business that are ready to offer job for them. But some people truly saying they don't want to be integrated like on this position, so they don't want to work in some places or in some jobs position, so they need to pass through, how to say, requalification probably, yes. So we have programs for them to help them to be very softly and well treated, integrated in our city in every area.
And can I return to a very small illustration maybe for you? It's interesting to think under this problem. I work with the case study. It's city Svetogorsk. And before starting the first wave of Russian aggression in 2014, the number of inhabitants here was near 4,000 people. And in the initial stage of Russian aggression, 15,000 people relocated to this city. And it's really a very interesting situation when you are staying on the place, but your life totally changed. Because 15,000 people start living in your place and change everything in your location. It's very interesting. I start thinking about the situation with Lviv, and they show this map that many people moved to Lviv in the initial stage of full-scale aggression of Russia. Of course, it's created some troubles with founding the flat here.
Thank you very much to Oksana, and thank you very much to Alexander. And yes, this war changed a lot in your lives and also in Europe. And we're going to support Ukraine, and we are going to cooperate both with research part of our speakers and also with local governments. Thank you very much for everyone who came here to KS, and thank you very much to all of you who are following us online. Thank you very much to Håkon Kampeseter for technical support, and thank you to Odne Nieber for an excellent cooperation.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you again next time.